Hey everyone, welcome to the Story Builder podcast. I am thrilled to be with author and editor Sarah Lamb. Sarah is the author of 35 books, which is totally incredible. Sarah, thank you so much for being with me.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Jim.
Absolutely. Now, Sarah, I talk to you all the time, and I'm just so thrilled to connect with you more and to talk a little bit more about your writing. And one of your most recent books that you just put out was the Mail Order Gambler. It's under the
hmm
Healing Husband series. And I know it's one of your favorites. Can you tell me a little bit more about that book?
Sure. I love that one so much because I love to write the characters that are just slightly morally gray, which is not something everyone does in historical romance. You know, you have your cowboy, you have your reverend, whatever. I write a lot of gunslingers. This one's a gambler. And he is keeping it very quiet that actually he funds an entire school for orphans. And he's there one day checking up on the place, and one of the teachers she has a fit. Your kind doesn't belong here. You need to leave. Get out, you know. And she's just really aggressive about it. And so he thinks it's kind of funny. He likes to tease her. He calls her Sunshine. And at the same time, he's been writing a woman he's kind of interested in, but he's pretty sure that as soon as she finds out he used to be a gambler, he doesn't have a chance. Meanwhile, this teacher has been writing someone, and she desperately hopes that he'll be okay with her continuing to teach once, if they get married or whatever. This is one of my favorites because you really get to see a softer side of Cody. You get to learn why Susan is so cranky, and you really get to see how they interact with the children and actually learn a lot from some of the kids.
That's fantastic. It's kind
Yeah.
of like that interesting backstory. Like, will it
Yeah.
backfire or not, right?
Right, right. Yep.
Now, have you always been drawn toward like the Western romance and historical fiction? Is that always been kind of the genre that you've
Um,
been focused on?
I've always liked that time period. So for me, it doesn't matter if I'm reading Regency or historical Western. I love that time period.
Why?
And why? I'm not sure. I think probably like most kids, my first introduction was Little House on the Prairie. And then my mom had these, I think they were called Janet Oak was the author, and she wrote a bunch of books, and I would sneak and read those. And I just loved the whole Western thing and, mail order bride because it was kind of dangerous. You never knew what you were getting into. Um, and then when I started writing this and I got a few books with real mail order bride stories, there were quite a few fascinating stories. Like this one woman who was her stagecoach was held up, and she begged the people, please, I'm on my way to my husband, don't take my wedding trunk. And the guy's like, all right. And she just happened to notice a scar on his hand as he
Mhm.
left her. Well, she gets there to get married. The guy standing before her, they start to sign the contract. He has a scar on his hand. She runs out of the church. That was a real story. There were
Wow.
tons of real stories like that, like people coming and the woman taking advantage of the man, telling him, "Oh, send me lots of money for my travel, pay for all my
Sure.
expenses," and she wouldn't show up.
Right.
Or she'd show up and they really just wanted her to be in a brothel or something. So
Mm.
there's just so many real stories that were pretty exciting. I was like, that's kind of a fun thing.
That's like it's not so action driven, it's more character driven. Is the bride like manipulating? Is the
Yeah.
husband manipulating? It's like almost like a soap opera of sorts, and you never know what you're getting into, right?
Right, exactly. Yes. And I have two styles of my books. One is the more character driven, where it's smaller stories, things like misunderstandings, causing hurt feelings, or um, trying to overcome a fear. But then I do have several of my books, and my new series will be like this, where there is absolutely always action. It's romantic suspense. So there's
Mm.
the gunslingers, there's the shootouts, there's the people who die or nearly die. There's those very serious situations. So I have two different styles of writing. So far my writers enjoy both types of
Your
books. So
readers?
that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, my
Yeah.
readers. Yeah, they
Gotcha.
enjoy both. So
That's awesome. And you kind of like alternating it between the two. It keeps things fresh and
yes,
exciting in that way.
sort of. I think I lean more towards the action, the suspense sort of thing. But I created this little town called Deepwater, and for some reason, no matter how many times I try and throw something at them, it doesn't happen. It's that little town's too perfect. It's the town where people go to heal from
Hmm.
things. Like in December, I released Away in Deepwater, and she's escaped to the town to avoid a scandal, and he's been living there for years also to avoid a scandal. And but as no matter how much I've tried to throw in stuff, I can't get over that's just like a sweet little happy everything gets better. People go there to feel better sort of thing. And those are seriously some of my best selling books. Everyone I've just had so many people come and say, "When's the next one? When's the next one?" I love to go back.
Sounds kind of comfy and cozy and like
Yeah, and I think that's what it
healing,
is for some people. Yeah.
restoring. That's really cool. Now, what inspires you most when you're writing these stories? Like, are you obviously if you already have a setting with a world with characters, you're like, hey, I can pick up, I already have these pieces to work with. But like, if you don't have that, like, what's inspiring you as you're kind of
And I
starting?
didn't have that until this year. Everything was a standalone, and I have
Okay.
spent the last year making more standalones connected with the same town.
Mm.
And like the sheriff will come through and, oh, it's Asher Steele, the sheriff, or oh, the doctor is. So
Mm.
I've been trying to tie them all together. I th- I don't know really what inspires me. I think I write what I would want to read.
That's fair. That's totally fair. I think that's a
Yeah,
great answer. Now, I know you're not a big movie person. You don't watch like a lot of movies or
I just
shows or
don't
anything
have
like that.
time.
Right,
I don't have
exactly. And I
time, and honestly, so many of them are it's disappointing when you know how it's going to end. You know how everything's
that's
going to
fair.
be. I'm not one of those people who loves the predictability of a book, the predictability of a movie.
Hmm.
I love to pick up something and like, "Oh, I did not see that coming." That's what I like. And I just don't see that very often in books and movies. So,
Yeah,
I'm like, I'd rather just spend that time writing.
I love it. That's how you can be more of a creator versus a consumer.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
true.
huge. I think that's really important, Sarah. And I think a lot of people are like, I'd rather just not do the work sometimes and just push a button and like sit back, whereas you're kind of leaning forward and diving in
Well,
and
and this past year, I gave a whole conference talk about that. And that's just, it's a little bit of fear in people. It's
yeah.
that writer's block tied in with fear as to why they would rather just sit and watch a
It's
show.
hard once you put something out there.
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh,
will
yeah.
people like it, right? That's the big question. It's like, will someone, bash it or trash it or negative reviews or any of that?
Yeah.
Or even, family members, relatives, friends, whatever. And it's like, are they gonna overanalyze some of this and start projecting or whatever?
Oh,
And
yeah. No, I have some who won't read them. They think I
Mhm.
write bodice rippers, they call them. I was like, no, no, I
Say that
don't.
again. What is that?
Bodice rippers, like from the 80s, like all those romance covers with Fabio on the front. I'm like,
Oh,
no,
yeah, I know the style you're talking. I've heard them as a different
yeah,
I've
no, I
heard them
don't
in the
write
different
those.
like the I think what was it, Signet or what's the most popular ones?
Oh,
You know what I'm talking
I
about? They
think,
had the
yeah, like the
Fabio.
Harlequin
That's
ones,
it,
maybe.
Harlequin. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah.
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 No, and I've had family members say, "Oh, are you still writing those little books of yours?" And I'm just like, "Yeah, you're right. It is really scary. I don't even look at my reviews until a book has been out for a couple of months. I don't check to see how many I have. I just pray people are leaving them." So
Fair.
that the Amazon algorithm will pick me up and show me to others.
Right.
But I don't look because when I do, I find I'll just be too nervous.
Yeah.
I can have, and I did this to myself last year. There was The book was rated a 4.8 with about 200 reviews. And I was
Great.
reading a few of the really good ones and I was like, "Oh, these are so sweet." But then I stumbled across the 1 star.
Yep.
And the person is all like, "This is so stupid. She went and threw something in the trash and then she left for the weekend and you didn't see her take her trash out. What is wrong with this writer? Blah blah blah. I didn't like the guy's name." And I just was like,
Ugh.
so I try not to read my
One
reviews.
star for that. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And she just had all kinds of opinions about it, which is totally fine. But at the same time, I was like, well, stuff happens off page when you're writing within a certain
Right.
word length. You don't, she opened the door, she closed the door, she locked the door, she
Yeah.
walked on the sidewalk,
Yeah,
There's just
sure.
some stuff's assumed. Like, you assume when they leave the house, they turn off the lights.
Right.
But
Right.
things like that'll kind of that's
How-
why I don't like to look at my reviews. I get too nervous. Or even if there's a really good one, but somebody doesn't like the way I had a character be, that I think would make me nervous and make me not want to keep writing that character the way that I had pictured them. So
Yeah.
I just, like I said, I
Influential.
pray there's lots of reviews so that others know it's an enjoyable book, but I try not to
Right.
read them.
That's a great honest answer. I pulled up one of my own this morning just for something like I couldn't remember what it was priced at. I could not off the top of my head. I'm like, I don't know. And then I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, huh. I don't know if I want to dig into this. I'm just like, what's the cost of
Yeah.
you going through those every review and then overthinking it and spinning it? And
Right.
it's already been published. There's others out there. It's like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is like worrying about stuff you can't remotely control. So
But it
just
mentally drags you down, and then next time you sit down to write, you can't do it, or you really
yeah,
struggle. And that's a big block right there. And so maybe it's avoidance, not wanting to see my reviews. I mean, I love
Fair.
seeing, like, I'll look at the number and, like, oh, yay, 170 reviews and I'm a 4.9. I'll look at that. And that makes me really excited. But the individual ones, I get nervous to read
That's
just
fair.
because I don't want that to prevent me from the next book.
Right. I think it's that critics math that you kind of mentioned. It's like you can have
Yeah.
all the positives, which do you focus on? The few negatives, and that's not going to help you at all. Now,
Mhm.
you have a lot of experience now writing all these books kind of in that Western genre, more romance focused, but you also do a lot of editing. And you've been a professional editor now for how long?
More than 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
That's
once it
impressive.
gets to a certain number, you kind of stop counting.
It blurs,
like-
doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now, as you've kind of been editing, working with a lot of different clients, how do you approach it when it's fiction? Like, just your typical approach. Obviously, if it's a Western, because I've worked with you now on a couple Westerns, that feels like it's your bread and butter. You're like, yes, this goes. No, that doesn't go. But say it's not a Western, say it's something, a different genre. Say it's, I don't know, what do you feel like, a thriller or mystery or whatever?
I think, even though there's differences between a mystery and a women's fiction or a sci-fi and a rom-com, there's a lot that's the same.
Yeah.
As in consistency in plot, consistency in timeline, characters. One that drives me crazy is, when somebody leaves the house in a car, but they pull up and park their truck. And that
yeah.
happens a lot. You'll get a lot of people who do that because
Sure.
they haven't decided. Or if he's blonde at the beginning and all of a sudden he runs his hand through his dark hair,
Brown, yeah.
because then I've got to scroll back. Wait a minute. I thought he was a blonde,
Yeah.
So
I'm guilty as sin of this. I know.
So regardless, I think, when you do these, the plot is basically the same. You're still looking for errors. You're still looking for that continuity. You're looking for things that will enhance the story, whatever's missing. If it jumps too quickly from one thing to the next and you need a small transition, or if you need to build up the suspense a little bit before everything comes crashing down. So it's all pretty much the same as far as structural or mechanical edits. I think I read a lot, so I know just genre expectations. The rom-com, they want it to be lighter, and fantasy, there needs to be some world building,
Right. Great insights. No, you're totally right. And I guess knowing those genre expectations, knowing story in general, that makes sense. So going back to your writing, knowing you have a lot of experience as an editor, are you kind of thinking then, to an extent, okay, Grace has blonde hair, are you kind of almost thinking, okay, keep Grace consistent, Grace is wearing a blue dress? Are you kind of thinking that way because you're like, I know what's going to trip me up with edits by default?
It's interesting. When I do my characters, I describe their personality more than how they look.
Really?
Yes. So like in the very first time we meet them, I might say she has a blonde hair, or he has dark hair, but then that's kind of it. From there on out, I focus on things like the personality. Like I'm working on one now, and the guy likes to tell a lot of jokes. He's really sarcastic.
A joker, yeah.
So when she sees him, she's like, oh, there's that grin of his I love. He looks like he's just told a joke. Or he sees her and, she's got that serious expression on her face because he knows that she's a thinker, she's an overthinker, whatever. Right. So I'm very generic on my descriptions because I think there's nothing worse than imagining a character in your head and then seeing them as a picture or later in an audiobook or something. Or like a lot of writers will have artwork done and then they don't look anything like you imagined them, So I'm very generic, let people kind of build their own in their mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of like when if you ever seen someone who you've heard their voice on radio and you're like, wait, that doesn't match up at all with the image.
Yeah, exactly. Idea. Exactly.
That happens to me a lot. If I'm listening to the radio in the car and I hear someone talking or whatever, and then I see a picture, I'm like, wait, you're no. So that makes sense. Interesting. Now, as you're looking at your stories, you typically aim a little shorter in length because of the genre expectations. About what, 30,000 words, 35 roughly?
Yeah, this genre is between 25 and 35,000. So most of mine fall around that 25 to 30 in size.
Okay. Do you find it different aiming when, certain genres, people love an 80,000 word novel, or 60 or whatever, and it's that much thicker, that many more words, whereas now you're kind of aiming, okay, 35 is my goal, because I've been really breaking this down myself. I want to hear your insights on it. Like, do you find it just like, okay, I can kind of structure it a little differently, approach it differently, knowing that 35-ish is my goal?
I like that size. I think because I'm an editor, I like to write clean and I like to write tight, and I don't like a whole lot of fluff. Unlike some fantasy authors out there, I'm not going to take 4 pages to describe a meadow as you're going past on your horse that we just took 2 pages to describe.
Fair.
I like to get into it. I like to tell the story. And with that tighter word count, some of the story progression, some of the backstory comes in a memory. You start off right away, she's on the train and she's thinking about how she's running away from home because her parents are going to have her wanted her to marry someone 30 years older than her, We get all that
Wow.
in a couple of paragraphs instead of, which you could do, 2 or 3 chapters of them experiencing that. I do like that shorter length. I think a lot of the readers in this genre love it because they can read one in an afternoon. We get a lot of people who say, I get to read just like 2 chapters while I'm waiting to pick up my kid in line at school. And,
Right.
they really like the shorter chapters, the shorter length, because then they can finish a book in a day or two, and they don't feel guilty that it's been sitting for 2 weeks and they feel like they're not making any progress, and they still get a really good and satisfying story. And part of that is a smaller cast of characters. You have your main 2 characters, and maybe you have 2 other characters, the lady at the diner or the boarding house owner or the sheriff's deputy. You don't have such a big cast of characters. You keep everyone tight and everyone focused.
Right.
But then if you want to use those characters again, you write another book and you focus a little bit more on some of the others. So it works well. And I really like that length. You can train yourself to write that length fairly quickly.
I agree, because I think that really no fluff is like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Because you're not worried about like padding your word count. At
Right.
least that's my thought process. I'm not saying everyone does that, but like
Right.
me personally, and I know you're speaking for yourself personally, um, a lot of description. I'm kind of that less is more
Yeah, I'll start
philosophy,
skipping through it. I
you
will,
know?
I'll be reading and I'll just be like, yeah, okay, let me just skip on forward to the action.
Right? Right? I remember distinctly, I have to call it this one book. I believe it was Franny and Zooey, or Franny and Zoe, J.D. Salinger. He wrote this one, and it was like literally like 5 pages of describing the things in a medicine cabinet. And I
Was he
was like,
related to Robert Jordan, I wonder?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I was flipping out. I was like, how on earth did this ever
Yeah,
get through? And I thought, you know what? This was all after Catcher in the Rye, and they just wanted to make that book as thick as possible because it was
yeah,
with some other short stories. And I was like, okay, this makes way more sense. But I, of course, skimmed through. I was like, I just remember it being such an obnoxious thing to have like how many things were listed in that medicine cabinet. And I know that's an extreme example, but I feel like sometimes some storytellers, maybe they aren't going that that obvious, but yeah, with some scenery, with some landscape, with
yeah,
trees, with whatever, I
yeah.
think we can lean that way, especially in the Western genre, because you are painting a picture
Hmm.
of the surrounding. I think it's almost like you could see how people could lean that way a little bit.
Though fortunately, you can paint that scene in, 2 paragraphs max, you know?
Yeah.
You don't need pages on pages. It's like Robert Jordan's The Long Winter. I was so excited when it was released, and I think only about a quarter of it was story. The rest was just descriptions, and I remember just like flipping through until I got back to the characters, flipping to the next characters. I was so disappointed. I will skim that. I just don't want to waste my time. I want the story. I don't want to know every detail of every blade of grass or every medicine bottle in the cabinet.
Right,
I don't
exactly.
don't care.
Exactly.
So I figure other people probably don't care either. So let's just give them the story, a little bit of
Right.
description, to set the scene, get it going in their minds. But
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Now, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong on this. I know you've written some nonfiction books as well. I'm trying to remember. I did you even write a Disney book? I think you wrote a
I
Disney book
did
too.
on managing food allergies at Disney, but Amazon kept coming after me. So I just unpublished it.
Okay. I know you had that one. Being a um, was it basically standing in with your medical care. I think I'm
Oh,
trying to
right. The unapologetic advocate. So,
unapologetic advocate. I know
yeah.
Sorry,
Yes.
I wrote a
No,
title for it
that
in my
one,
head.
I love that one. And I've had a lot of sales on it, but not a lot of reviews, which is kind of strange. But yeah, just basically teaching parents how to advocate for their children, whether it's at school or whether it's in healthcare, but also teaching them how to teach their children, even from toddler age through teenage years, how to advocate for themselves. Because, our kids are going to learn from us how to advocate for themselves. And one day they will not be around us. They will be in a situation where they need to say, this isn't okay. This is not
Yeah.
something I can do. This is not safe for me. And they need to know how to do it without being afraid that their voice won't be heard.
Do you approach nonfiction differently than you would like one of your Western stories?
Probably. I really like writing nonfiction, but it is definitely more time consuming. You have to make sure that you are giving good information and concise information in the words that people can understand, but you also cannot represent yourself as someone that you're not. I'm not a medical professional. I don't have, I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak medically. I can
Right.
only speak, I'm also not a lawyer. So when I'm repeating this information for people, and giving a general interpretation, I have to remind them that this is not legal advice. This is explaining to you what this is. So if you need to delve deeper, these are the steps you would take. These are the people you would look for. And that in itself can be very time consuming, a lot more
Sure.
so than just writing fiction.
Right, right. One's completely made up, the other you have to be very sensitive and
Right.
responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, it sounds really thinking more like a journalist in this specific case, making sure you're, representing yourself appropriately and having the right resources and references and
Mm-hmm.
everything. Okay. I'm just curious because I mean, obviously there are a lot of different areas of nonfiction, but especially like your unapologetic advocate book, that one, it makes a lot of sense that you're going to be extremely sensitive and
Mm-hmm.
cross your T's and dot your I's.
Yeah.
Now, have you, I know you have all your books available in paperback. I know you have them in ebook. Have you started doing some audiobooks? Because I thought you said you did.
Yes, and I have
Okay.
the majority in large print as well, although Amazon does
Awesome.
not link them. But
Right.
I have I think I have 8 audiobooks right now, and my narrator has agreed to do at least another 10 for me.
Okay. What's the process been like for you? Because I know a lot of people, they prefer them because they can do them in the car, on the go, working out, whatever.
Um, Honestly, it's been very tricky to get people interested in the audiobooks, more so than I thought it would be. Um, so the getting them done is relatively easy,
Hmm.
because that's my narrator who does all of the work, and he works extremely hard to produce
Hmm.
such an amazing and quality audiobook. So I believe, honestly, for every hour of recorded audio on his end, it's like 3 or 4 hours of work. Yeah. So
Wow.
when you contract with someone to make an audio, and this is why I know everyone's like, "Oh, the price is really expensive," but that price they're being paid is only with the audio that you're getting.
Right.
Like if you have a 3-hour audio and it was 200 per hour, you're only paying 600 because they did 3 hours of work. They didn't really do 3 hours work. They did 12 hours of work plus that. They get the
Hmm.
manuscript, they go over it, they check, do I need to learn how to pronounce this word? They figure out voices and whatnot. So they prep the manuscript. They
Right.
do the recording. They have, the special softwares, the special sound panels, all that stuff. They listen very carefully. Any little mistakes they make, they have to go back, re-record. Um,
Yeah.
then they render the files. They run them through a thing to make sure that the quality is there. Um, and then they upload the files. My part's pretty easy. I just write the
Just
book
write the
and then I
book.
just listen to the
Yeah.
audio, and I'm
That's
not super
fantastic, though.
picky. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
it. I'm not super picky. I told him just as long as you say their names right, it's all good with me. So
That's fantastic. Now, have you done any other languages for your books?
I would like to. I would very much like to. I've seen a lot of people doing that. And I think that that's something that I would like to do with my series once I get that. And then potentially my box sets as I start to create those.
That's awesome. Now, having 35 books, I know some of which are coming out soon, but having that many, do you ever forget like the stories? They blur together a little bit in your mind? Because I have this problem and I don't have 35 books. I'm
Yeah.
trying to like, which version was it that I published? Did I make some changes? I can't even remember all the details.
So a couple weeks ago, we'd had a really long day and we were going to drive in town to get some dinner. And my husband picks up a proof copy that was in the car and he's like, "Oh, there's this Last Resort." And he starts reading the back, the little blurb synopsis. I'm like, "Wait a minute, what did you say his name was?" And he read, and I'm like, "No, that can't be his name. I just named my other character that." I was like, "It's okay." I was like, "That's a work in progress. I will change it. Everything is good as long as her name is not." And he's like, "Yeah, that's her last name, all right." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." Well, I do forget names. I like to call people the same name over and over again, which I need
Uh-huh.
to stop. Like,
Uh-huh.
I even keep a list. I have a list, but I still go back to these same names over and over and over again, which is really annoying because
Eh.
I uploaded a book trailer I'd made yesterday, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's not her name. I had to rename her, so I had to redo the book trailer, re-upload it, delete my posts on social media, put them back up, and just." Yeah, I need to figure something out because obviously what I'm doing right now is not working.
I know that Stephen King evidently names a lot of his characters Bill. And if Stephen King can get away with naming a lot of his characters Bill, maybe we don't have to worry about this one as much as we really think we
Yeah, hopefully not. Hopefully. Ugh.
do. I I know for me, like this is one where I would wholeheartedly embrace AI because there's a lot of name generators out there on Google anyway. But if you like say, hey, a name like, I don't know, Jake McCall is one of my characters. Like a name like, especially focusing on the syllables and then the length, that kind of
Mm,
thing.
mhm.
Like, give me 50 examples like that, and it just spits it out. And then I'm like, ooh, I can narrow it down really fast versus, those name generators. I mean, I've done the name thing where it's like, give me boys' names that are like Eric or something. And it's such a time suck because you're kind of just it's almost like back in the day, Sarah, when everyone used to have a book of baby names and they're like trying to
That's
name
what
their
I use. I
kids,
have 2 of those.
right?
I have 2, and, because I bought one mine was starting to fall apart, and I bought another one at the place we volunteer at, and yeah, and I just go through, I'm like, let me find something with an E," and I just kinda flip through and
Right.
pick something. Yeah, that's what I do. Because 'cause I'm worried if I spend too much time online, and I do this when I'm writing too, if I don't know something, I put a note in because otherwise I will spend way too much time trying to find the perfect name, trying to
Uh-huh.
find the exact year and the exact spelling. I'd
Right.
rather go back and do that once it was all over.
Right. Almost like those can be pitfalls that stop you
Yeah.
from finishing or
Yeah.
doing other work in a timely manner. It
Mhm.
almost leads to perfectionism too. It's like, hey, I'm doing all this hard work. I'm doing all this. I'm gonna hyper fixate on that one detail that most readers are gonna be like, cool,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah,
So
it's true. Your readers are not going to care if you spell Eric with a C or Eric with a K.
great point.
They absolutely won't. But meanwhile, you are sitting there obsessing over it. Well, how does it look on page? Is there a difference
Yeah.
between how it sounds? Which
Yep.
one looks cooler? Which one looks more like my character?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that can really stop you from doing what you need to do, which is writing.
Yeah. Now, I know you normally set a goal when you write, is it usually like, hey, I'm going to write at least one chapter?
Yes, I try when I write to finish a chapter, and my chapters are usually about 1,200 words.
That's good.
Sometimes they're a little less if that's what fits. Sometimes they're longer.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I try really hard to finish that chapter because if I stop, then it's a lot harder to pick back up. I mean, I can read where I was, but
Hmm.
maybe I've kind of forgotten it. But if I can only if I'm sitting, say, in a doctor's office waiting room, and just like a scene comes to mind, I'll take out my phone and I'll just kind of type it out on there. So maybe it's just a little section, but
Right.
later I know I can slide that in somewhere.
Right.
I don't like to waste my time when it comes to writing. I like to try and maximize it, so I can just get my book done quicker.
That's awesome. No, that's a great mindset because I think maybe being too precious with your writing is a very common issue that a lot of writers face because I know, again, myself included. I'll pick on myself mainly, but you can really overthink things. You can try to find the perfect setting. I know you've even told me this before. It's like people don't care if it's a shootout in a parking lot or a hallway at all, or in a Walmart. They don't care the scenery, the location. You might care a lot, but the
Mhm.
reader, they just want some action. They just want to have a good time and
Yeah,
enjoy
and when
themselves.
exactly, and once your book is published, they don't know if that shootout originally was gonna be in the Walmart versus the hotel
Right.
versus the restaurant parking lot, They
Yeah.
just wanna be entertained, but I think we get so worried about that perfectionism, like you said, that it stops us and it stunts us, and it keeps us from writing, it keeps our readers from getting the book,
Mhm.
and it keeps us from moving on to the next book because readers will devour your books. But once they have run out of your books, once they've closed your book and there's no
Mhm.
more,
Mhm.
they will go on to the next person.
Right.
And, when you have another book out later, hopefully they'll come back and read it. But if you have a larger backlist, I guess that's what I'm saying, then they'll
Yeah.
stay in your books and in your world
Right.
longer because
Right.
they know what they're getting, they know they enjoy it, they know they can expect a good story. And I recently read a book. I got it off of one of those, like the Stuff Your E-Reader days.
Yeah.
And it was historical romance. I'd never heard of the author before. Oh my gosh, I think it was one of her earliest books. It was so riddled with typos, but it had the best plot I'd ever read. And I just found myself I just read that whole thing in a night. I was up till like 2 a.m. and I don't usually do that. And it was full of those little twists and turns. It was so good. And I actually wrote her an email and I was like, I loved this. This was great. I never heard back. I was like,
Yeah.
darn, I would have loved to have cross promoted with her. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
readers are most readers are
Mhm.
okay with a couple of typos or a small inconsistency thing as long as they have a good story. They just want to be entertained. They just want to pretend that they're anywhere but in their kid's car pickup line or at the doctor's office. They
Right.
want to
Right.
leave their work stress, their medical stress, whatever behind. They just want to enjoy a good story for a couple hours. And even better if it's one that they think about after they've closed the pages. I think that should be every author's goal. Make them keep thinking about your book
Right.
after they've closed it.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Now I know you have a special offer for the listeners of this podcast with one of your books, right?
Right. So to celebrate the launch of my new series, the Red Ridge Chronicles, I have a free book that's the prequel and also a free audio book. And so I'll make sure you get those links so you can share them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put them right there so people won't miss them. I appreciate your generosity there. I think that'll be a great way to kind of dive into your writing and get to enjoy that. Any final words for other story builders, other writers, a lot like you? Maybe they're starting out, maybe they're literally right where you are right now.
Sure. don't get caught up in the small details. Just keep writing. Write the next book, because if you do that, if you focus on just writing a good, solid story, the more you write, the more you'll grow as an author. And you'll be able to create such a big backlist of books for everyone to enjoy. And there's nothing like holding your own book in your hand. So don't rob yourself of that by taking so long to finish your book if you don't need to. Don't sweat over
Yeah.
those small details.
Yes, that's wonderful. How can readers and writers looking for an editor connect with you?
Sure. So readers can find me at sarahlambooks.com. You can also get those free books there.
Mhm.
And if they're interested in editing, my editing website is sarahlambwriting.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Sarah